Well, the golden pantomime is sort of the story of our lives, told in a theatrical way through ceramics and painting, where we incorporate theatre, domestic worlds, interior worlds, and our surrounding life in Ballarat. Funny stories, humorous stories, sad stories. You'll see a lot of imagery and shapes and things in this exhibition that are a show, a spectacle, and we've definitely enjoyed creating a spectacle of the everyday and a spectacle of domestic life in our respective practices.
And we reference history in our art forms, as well as the history of the town that we are living in. And we reference our lives in I think, a humorous way.
Yeah.
We don't want to be too serious because we want to have some fun and we want people to have some joy when they look at the work. So yeah, it talks about still life, theatre, how life is a stage. I started ceramics since I was a small child because both my parents are both potters. And then I experimented during university with clay, always did it. And then after I started with some porcelain, and then I think it was, when I was 20 or something. And then from there I've always worked with porcelain, basically due to the high colours that you can get, like intensities. And I used to make, I still make jewellery. And then from the jewellery I sort of developed into hand-built vessels, and they have evolved. And then for this exhibition especially, they've evolved into using different clays and mixing the porcelain with those other clays as well.
Okay, well, our collaboration probably began first and foremost as friendship. We were attracted to each other because of our similar personalities, interests, sense of humour, and from that it grew into an appreciation of one another's work, which is a great reflection of our personalities and why we are friends.
Making the collaborative works was an enlightening experience because I guess it really made me shift out of my comfort zone with what I like to make and what I'm used to making and what I thought I wasn't capable of making. Some of the squashed sort of painted forms that Madeleine she's decorated, I never thought that they would work. I thought they wouldn't work. So I sort of pushed myself, like, no, we're going to make these. We'll see if they work. We had to do a lot of testing with things, pushing out of our comfort zones of what we knew would work. And a lot of things in ceramics didn't work, but majority of them did, which was good.
Yeah, and in response to what collaboration has meant, I think too, that collaboration meant that we were in one another's studios, and I loved that because I do love working on my own, but I crave exchanging ideas and working next to someone else and seeing something evolve together. So being able to articulate, make together, the sense of community, that has been the most important thing, I think. Colour is a really important part of my process because I find it's the most immediate way for me to express myself, my inner world, my emotions, and I think a lot of people connect with that when they see my work. They're not just appreciating perhaps my world, but they have an emotional response to colour that can be completely separate to what the imagery might be in a painting, but how they feel about it, they have an emotional response, and I love that about colour. In this exhibition, there is a lot of high-key coloured works. A lot of people are surprised when I have been making all of them in Ballarat, and I have made them during winter, which is particularly grey sometimes. If anything, that's given me a bit of an incentive to make probably brighter works as I retreat into my inner landscape and seek other visions and other experiences to paint about.
Colour that's my whole work basically. People know me for my colour and my patterns that I create. And similar to Madeleine, it's so important to me and a way of expressing what I see in the landscape, but also an emotional connection to place. And some of these pots in this exhibition respond to the natural landscape around Ballarat, Golden Plains, where I live, sunsets, the beach, got in Queenscliff. But they also respond to Madeleine's paintings. So at the start of this, I made some pots that were sort of fiery reds that were sort of responding to the bushfires and the what was going on from what I could see and in the environment and the summer that we had. And then I think Madeleine was doing sort of similar paintings as well. And then after she had developed some paintings, I was able to respond to her colours. And so that was challenging because I'm so used to having a certain select colour palette that I use. And so then I had to look at colour in a different way and go, okay, well, I don't really have brown, but I'll try brown next to a green and incorporate that. But it was really nice because it threw all these surprises. Sometimes, like you have sort of magical surprises in ceramics, and sometimes they work really well. So that was really nice, being able to push myself to try different colours, and yeah, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And also then, obviously, not using colour, that was really scary for me. So making the black stoneware pieces and the raku pieces and just the pure porcelain pieces just felt kind of wrong. But I enjoyed making them because it just allowed me to just focus on the form at the same time.
I have moved here just in the last year and a half, so I'm only relatively new to Ballarat. So I've been very keen to just go explore, see lots of different things within the immediate vicinity of Ballarat, which has probably surprised Ruby sometimes. We've had discussions where I've gone, wow, I've gone to Black Hill and it's so interesting up there with the pine needles and the forest and the sculptural elements of the trees. And Ruby will say, Black Hill, I haven't been up there for years. You know, I sort of haven't seen that for quite some time. And I suppose I've had like a sense of the new and a freshness to some of these places that Ruby is familiar with, but not recently familiar with. So I've sort of gone and seen, I suppose, a lot of iconic places in Ballarat. And one of the things I have appreciated about being here is that it's very different to New South Wales, and it's Ballarat, and it's particularly different to Newcastle, where I was living. And I love the historic elements of the city, the architecture, the Sturt Street gardens, the symmetry in the town planning, the trees, the colonnades of gardens. And I think you can see that in my work in compositionally. There is lots of parallels and archways. I reflect on, I look up a lot, and I look at a lot of the architraves and the street shop frontages. And that's not just in the paintings, but also in the timber constructions that I've made for Ruby's ceramics in this show. They reference the timber work and also the facades of shops and buildings in Ballarat. And I think there's such a strong use of ornamentation in Ballarat through the public sculptures and the gardens, like I said before. And I love that, and I've really played on the decorative and ornamentation and pattern and repetition in these paintings to mimic what I have seen of Ballarat City.
Looking at the architecture especially, Madeleine points out things and I'm like, yeah, I never really thought it was that beautiful, and because I'm just so used to just driving or walking around it. But yeah, I definitely a level of appreciation for this of Ballarat and its beauty, that's for sure. And I guess the way I reflect Ballarat in my work is clearly by the use of gold, and I like to always highlight that I am from Ballarat. Then that's why I use a lot of gold, not only because it looks aesthetically pleasing with the colours, but yeah, I like to accentuate that there's a connection there between that. I've always thought of my pots, even before this show, because they're handmade and hand-built, that they kind of have their own sort of personalities and quirky personalities and traits, because they're not perfect, they're not wheel-thrown. They have a little bit of a lean to them, like that. And so I just felt that the title needed to talk about that. And because it is the dinner table, it was the dining table, I mean, And these pots weren't just functional pots that you eat your soup out of. They're decorative pots, and they have their own personalities and characteristics. And therefore, when I was making them, I just saw them as people in my life. And I kind of, when I was making them, some of them I was thinking about certain people. So I was sort of like, oh, if Dad was a pot, he'd definitely be this pot. Not that I'd tell him which one it is. And if Jane Bodle was a pot, she'd be this kind of pot. And so it had to be, it is like a stage, and they are sort of interacting with each other. They're kind of gossiping with each other. They're kind of being weird. Someone's telling a joke. And that's why I thought the title had to be The Dinner Guests.
Well, I think there's like obvious representations in some works more than others. In my paintings particularly, there might be a jug or there might be an urn or something. But I think more interestingly, something that's evolved from our collaboration is really appreciating negative space. And in the process of making some of Ruby's crazy vessels, our collaborative vessels that I've painted, we were equally as attracted to the remnants that came from cutting out those shapes in a slab of clay. And then how do we then, rather than discard them, use them, reinvent them into another piece? So our other collaborative work were our votive shelves that look a little bit like sets. And they're decorated with all those shards that came from cutting out these vessels. And so that was really exciting, and that was a cause and effect process that we developed on our own just by working together. And then I've sort of picked up on that and gone, well, where else can I use that in my work? And in the process of coming up with prints and compositions in my prints for this show, I was equally as attracted to how do I cut out shapes in lino and use that negative space to create compositions and reinvent that positive negative space. And that connects then back with Ruby's vessels. So there's this constant back and forth and sharing of methodologies, yeah.
I think that this show and my experience working with Madeleine has been a real true collaboration of two artists. We had a starting point. Madeleine had her paintings, I had my pots, and we weren't, at the start, we hadn't crossed paths with our works and ideas at the start, because we only just started. And so it was just a lot of communication and sharing our ideas that everything grew from there. So I made my pots. I had a certain way and ideas about them. I wanted to use my own style, but I also like to reference historical pots from history in a contemporary fashion, and pots that I've seen my parents and other potters make. So I had that historical connection. I have to make a proper vessel, and then I'll make some strange vessels with Madeleine. But it was great because I made what I thought was pots, and then from looking at Madeleine's paintings, I was like, how would I make that vessel? Because that is so abstract. And then that pushed me to make these, not functional, but more sculptural pieces that I would have never made before. And then that translated into me picking out the shapes, the negative spaces in her paintings, making pots from, and then also transferring that onto some of the bowls that I've made with slip on them that explore those shapes. And then from there, I translated that into more vessels that have shapes on them. So there's like lots of steps through all the different processes that have led to the final artworks you see in this exhibition.